This video will cover the various reasons as to why the Chinese Communist Party was able to gain support up to 1945. We will go over the Long March and the leadership of Mao Zedong, discuss the establishment of the Yenan Soviet, land reform and Mao's Rectification campaign, the impact of the war with Japan, and the unpopularity of Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang. We hope you enjoy. The Long March was a retreat or migration to the main body of the Red Army, or the armed forces of CCP, from their base in southeastern China to a safer base in northwestern China. The Long March had been able to save the CCP from immediate destruction, and Mao was able to overcome two challenges to his position. The first being a large meeting of the Politburo. Politburo was the supreme policy and executive committee of the Communist Party that was responsible for making key decisions. Was hosted to assess the disasters that have befallen the CCP in January of 1935. Mao was able to direct most of the criticism at Bo Gu, the head of the CCP, and Zhou Enlai, the political leader in charge of the army. Mao won the argument and emerged in a stronger position, and he became a permanent committee of the Politburo. Bo was then replaced by one of Mao's close political allies, Lo Fu. And the second, later in June, Mao met with Zhang Guotao, the former leader of the EU-1 base. Because Zhang's Fourth Army was larger and better equipped than Mao's First Army, he had a strong reason to become the leader of the combined force. However, Mao instead sidelined him as a deputy chairman of the military commission. Zhang stopped being a threat to Mao after his defeat on the Upper Yellow River by the Nationalists in the autumn of 1935. Although Mao was the most powerful figure in the CCP, he still faced criticism within the party from a group of Russian-trained Chinese communists who had returned to enforce the orthodox communist teaching that revolution can only occur in big cities. In response to these arguments, Mao, alongside Chen Boda, mastered the Marxist philosophy and argued that it must adjust to the Chinese reality. Mao managed to defer the meeting of the Seventh Communist Party Congress, which could have overridden his decisions until 1945. By this time, with Boda's aid, he had developed the Mao cult. Through propaganda, Mao was portrayed as a great leader and became the chairman of the Communist Central Committee and of the Politburo. Between 1935 and 1945, Mao was able to turn the Yenan base into a Soviet. Mao was able to enforce his belief that the Chinese Revolution would start in the countryside by mobilizing the peasantry. He had gathered units of the Red Army from Yenan to occupy the countryside. Landlords were evicted and mercilessly killed. Soldiers were given strict instructions to not behave like warlord troops. Land was shared amongst the peasantry and local Soviets were set up. Literacy and education programs were introduced with basic medical services provided. Mao's policy of confiscating land from the landlords was successful in increasing the popularity of the CCP, which increased its numbers from 700,000 to over 1 million by 1945. However, objectors and critics of Mao were not tolerated. Anyone who questioned Mao's interpretation of Marxism or his peasant policy were excluded from the party. Mao mainly directed his attention against the party intellectuals who had been trained in Moscow, and those who questioned his authority and policies. A rectification campaign was launched to target those guilty of subjectivism, people that did not agree with Mao's interpretation of Marxist-Leninism, and sectarianism, for anyone who did not fully agree with and obey the authority of the Central Committee. By the time the rectification campaign ended, around 40,000 people had been expelled from the party. Mao had eliminated anyone who did not agree with him and created an obedient revolutionary force, which later became highly effective in defeating nationalists. Between 1937 and 1945, China experienced a brutal war with Japan. The war started after the Marco Polo incident in 1937 and quickly escalated to a prolonged conflict, which led to massive suffering and destruction across China. One of the worst incidents was the Nanjing massacres, where the Japanese troops mass murdered Chinese civilians, and destruction of the Yellow River dikes by the nationalists, causing the drowning of 500,000 people. By the end of 1941, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, a big part of eastern China was already under Japanese occupation. The war then dragged on, despite both the nationalists and communists, which were led by Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong respectively, were still in China. They weren't united enough to fight and win against Japan. But because of this, it meant Japan couldn't win either, since Japan controlled big cities, but countrysides are out of their control. Although in 1945, the USA dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which finally forced Japan to surrender. This meant China had won the war, but at the cost of the deaths of 20 million Chinese citizens, inflation, and the destruction of agricultural land, which led to starvation. The war with Japan had a massive impact on the Chinese Communist Party, but ironically, it helped save the CCP from being destroyed by the nationalists. Before the war, Mao's forces were weak and were always at risk of being eliminated by Chiang Kai-shek's army. However, when Japan invaded China, Chiang's focus shifted to defending the country from Japan's attack rather than fighting against the communists. This gave Mao plenty of time and space to strengthen his party. During the war, Mao avoided conflict with Japan and instead focused on propaganda, saying that the CCP is the true defender of China's independence. He let the nationalists take care of the direct fights with Japan while he controlled the rural areas, which increased their influence among its residents. By 1945, the CCP had controlled large areas of northern China, had an army of nearly 1 million, with an additional militia of 900,000. They were also recognized by both the USA and the USSR. After Japan's surrender, Chiang Kai-shek technically won the war, but this victory did not help popularize Kuomintang. He struggled to gain support from citizens, so he set up the National Political Consultative Council, which was seen as superficial. During the war, Chiang's leadership also worsened people's suffering. For example, he ordered the dikes on the Yellow River to be blown up to slow down the Japanese army. But this caused a massive flooding which killed 500,000 people and forced people to move away. Refugees faced starvation and resorted to eating tree bark or cannibalism, especially with the army's food demand and harsh taxation, which made things even worse. Economically, the situation collapsed. In order to fund the war, Chiang's government raised taxes and printed more money, which caused severe inflation, and wages could not keep up. Even after the Japanese defeat, Chiang did nothing major to rebuild China. Instead, he focused on critics and making arrests towards communists and liberals. As a result, Kuomintang became very unpopular. The population had lost faith in his leadership since he failed to improve their lives and seemed more focused on maintaining power than rebuilding the country. This further strengthened the Chinese Communist Party, which seemed more disciplined and connected to its people.